the number one thing I ask myself when I am working with my students is, how can I make this visual? Just because your child is conversational, don't say like, oh, this video is not for me. I don't need this. My child can talk. This is not just for low support needs. All autistic individuals will thrive and do better in learning and in life with visual support. Hello, YouTube family. Welcome back to the Mindshaper SLP channel. I am Rebecca Robbins, and as always, we are here to help autistic individuals and their families create fruitful and fulfilling lives. This week, we are doing that with part 3 of our video series we've been doing the past few weeks of the 3 things you must know about autism. And like I said last week, not only if you have an autistic person in your life that you care about, but even if you don't have an autistic person in your life that you know personally, you need to know this about autism because there's a lot of autistic people out there in the world, and we need to make this world a more inclusive place for everybody. The best way to do that is to know how we can help set up our communities, our schools, our workplaces in a way so that everybody can thrive. This week, the number 3 thing that you need to know about autism is make it visual. I'm going to go into what all of that means in today's video, but before I do that, let's just do a little bit of background information as to why this is the number 3 thing you must know about autism. It's because most autistic learners are visual learners, and the auditory aspect of learning can be really, really challenging for many, many, many neurodivergent folks or many, many autistic individuals. There's actually been functional MRIs done on autistic brains and shows that the areas of the brains that light up when they receive auditory information are scattered all over the brain. You might not know this, but the difference between that and a neurotypical brain is, in a neurotypical brain, there is a very specific spot in the brain that lights up when we are receiving and processing auditory information, and it's called Wernicke's area if you were curious and you wanted to get your neuro geek on. That's where we process our receptive language. It's located in what's called the temporal lobe of our brain, and that is the area of the brain that is supposed to govern auditory processing information of language. However, with an autistic brain, what they have found is all different areas of the brain light up, which means that an autistic individual or an autistic child is more likely to have a challenge with auditory processing than a neurotypical person. And that is why keeping things visual is so important. Today's video is going to be really chock full of really functional tips that you can utilize, and I'm going to show you actual visual supports that I've made over the years and used with my students. So definitely stay tuned and watch till the end. And while we're at it, like, subscribe, and share. As always, that does really go a long way in helping my channel reach all the people that need to hear this information and to help our channel grow so that we can really spread the word of autistic acceptance and awareness out in the world. Back to what I was saying, there is an analogy that I like to give when it comes to this concept of auditory processing and the autistic brain. You kind of think of it as like a filing cabinet, and a neurotypical brain has a really neatly filed filing cabinet. It's color coordinated. It's like the chicks from the Home Edit came in and they organized the file cabinet. It's like rainbow, color coordinated. Everything has its place. When a signal comes in, you know exactly where to find it in that filing cabinet because it's so neatly organized. Now, what you can equate the auditory processing capability of some autistic brains to be is that someone came in and they took that filing cabinet and they dumped it upside down, and then they swirled it around like this. So now when auditory information is coming in, it's like that person is looking through a scattered, very disorganized filing cabinet, and it's going to take them a while to find the file that matches that information that is coming through with that auditory message. I always like to give you guys analogies or ways to picture things that are palatable for you to understand so you can really put yourself in the shoes of your autistic loved one. I find that that filing cabinet analogy is a really good one to help you understand what's happening with the auditory processing. And it's why I'm always, always, always saying, slow down, pause more. We have to give our autistic loved ones time to process what we say to them. And if we give them more auditory information to digest when they're still processing the first thing we said to them, sometimes it can reset the clock back to zero. And now all of a sudden they have to reprocess all over again the brand new information that's coming in. So it's really, really important for us to slow down and pause and give lots of time for auditory processing, especially if you know that this is an area of challenge for your child. The other thing we can do is make it visual as much as possible. The number one thing I ask myself when I am working with my students is, how can I make this visual? It is a huge part of the lessons that we teach in buddy group. It is a ginormous part of what I do with my students individually, as you're going to see today with all of these examples that I have of visual supports that I've used and made over the years. Maybe you hear like, oh yeah, make it visual, need visual supports, but you're not really sure what that means or how to do it. And the fact of the matter is there's lots and lots of ways we can make things visuals, and there's lots and lots of ways we can support autistic individuals with visual supports. And the other thing, before I go into the actual ways we can use visual supports and different examples of what that can look like, I want to say that this is not just for individuals with higher support needs. Even if you have a child who might have been diagnosed as Asperger's syndrome back in the day when that was still a diagnosis, it is still vital to be using visual support. So many of my executive functioning and life skills coaching clients are individuals in their 20s. They're highly conversational. They're out in the world. They're in college. They have jobs. When I am able to take the things, the strategies that we're working on and make them visual for them, it helps so much. And I think it's so easy for us to forget when we have a highly verbal child or a child that is very conversational and very able to express themselves conversationally, that it's still important for us to utilize a visual support. In fact, I have heard from many autistic individuals that when they are in a state where they're stressed out, even if they are highly conversational and are usually typically very verbal with speech, when they are in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, or their nervous system is triggered, go back to 2 weeks ago. Our number one thing you must know about autism is nervous system regulation. Don't worry, I'm going to tag the whole playlist at the end of this video. But when that happens, they might become situationally nonverbal or not able to speak in that moment because their nervous system is so triggered that their ability to communicate kind of shuts down. Imagine how powerful it would be in those moments for those people to have visual supports to communicate their needs. Just because your child is conversational, don't say like, oh, this video is not for me. I don't need this. My child can talk. This is not just for low support needs. All autistic individuals will thrive and do better in learning and in life with visual support. So that being said, let's go in and talk about the different types of visual supports that you can create or use with your child. First and foremost, this is probably not going to come as a surprise, but we can use visual supports to help a child communicate. This can be as fancy as a robust communication device app that's on an iPad, like Lamp, Proloquo to go, a really dynamic app that has lots of pictures on it that they're using to communicate because maybe that person is minimally speaking or non-speaking. We can also use visuals to help children communicate that are emerging communicators, or maybe are able to request their wants and needs, or able to use one word here or there, but we're looking to build and expand upon their language. Visual supports can be huge in that respect. They don't have to be fancy. My very first example of visuals I'm going to show you are so janky. Like These are index cards. The symbols are from a program called Board Maker, which is a little bit obsolete now. You can still use it. They're still great. Back in the day when I started my career, it was the way to make visual supports and use to create picture symbols, and it was a highly expensive program. But now we have something called Canva, which I use all the time. No, I'm not an affiliate for it. No, they don't get advertising dollars for me mentioning them, but it's an amazing program that you can access for free or for a nominal fee monthly so that you can utilize any of the pictures in there. I think it's $12.99 per month to use their whole library, but they have a huge library of free images as well. And you could just pay for the images that have licensing attached to them individually. You don't have to do a membership. It's an amazing, amazing tool that I use all the time to make my visual supports. I have one today. I'm going to show you that I used Canva, but these were old school Board Maker symbols that I printed out, and you could see, and they're just taped on. I don't know if you can see, but literally with Scotch tape onto an index card. And you can see they have stains on them. They're very well loved. And these yes, no cards have taught so many kids how to answer yes, no questions. It's not even funny. And they don't have to be fancy. They're not laminated. They have stains. It's okay. The other thing I want to mention while we're at it, I want you to note the use of color. I used green for yes, and I put it on a green index card because we think of green means go. Yes is like a green light, a go. And I used red for no. Red is like stop, don't do that. We associate red with stop. No is a stop. When you are making your visual supports, I highly, highly, highly recommend using color to help you. I use color in many different ways in my visual supports, whether it's the feeling that is evoked, like in this situation with the green and the red, or just to highlight different segments, different areas of a chart that the child needs to pay attention to. When I'm working on executive functioning skills and I'm teaching how to read a schedule, for example, I'll use different colors to block out the different sections of information. So it's really clear that like this is a different part than this part. Using color and color coordinating your visual cues is really, really, really helpful. So yes, no. These are great visual supports used to help someone communicate. Even if someone is typically able to express themselves with speech and they're having a hard time and they're not able to speak, you can pull out your yes, no symbols. You can communicate a lot with just asking yes, no questions. So I highly recommend making yourself some of these. Some other ways that you can use visual support. This was a visual that I created for a student where we were working on 2-word phrases. So he loved to get tickles and he had a goal of labeling body parts. So we worked on tickle different body parts, and he would actually take this and put it in the spot, tickle hand, and is teaching this. This is 2 different words, but the only thing that was changing was the body part. So it was really teaching him how this action was applied to all these different body parts. And then we also used it with the word open and all the different things we can open. Open door, open book, open bubbles, open lunchbox, open bag, open bottle, open box, open drawer. We did it with colors and some of his favorite things that he likes to play with. And I think I had a felt board that I would put these on. It was teaching him to say like blue ball. And then we can change out the color. Green ball, purple ball. This visual cue was really, really effective and helpful in helping one of my students learn how to start using 2-word phrases in their request. I used this in a lesson to help my students create a longer sentence with some adjectives in it. It was attached to 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. There was an additional activity that I created to go along with it. And then all of the adjectives were represented in pictures here, along with the color fish. So I think there was a pretty blue fish or spotted orange fish. the use of the pictures here was really helpful in my students being able to utilize their describing words in the sentence during the activity. You can get really simple, just like the yes/no cards, but then you can get really, really complex as well. This is another visual that I have created. My students love the My Play Home app. It's a great app on the iPad, especially for younger students, emerging communicators. There's lots of interaction they could do. And I used to say that they were the talker, I was the toucher. And so I would manipulate the app and they would tell me what to do. There was different rooms, so I created different pages. There's a page for outside with the vocabulary that was in the outside part of the app. There's one for bathroom. There's one for mom and dad's room, so on and so forth. But then there was certain aspects of the app that were available to talk about in any room. And that was the core vocabulary that stayed here. Then I could switch out the variable page. So this was the kitchen page, which had actions and then the different food and everything. I can switch that out. Oh, okay, you want to go outside. Here's the outside vocabulary. And we were able to say, oh, we're outside. Let's make the boy swing. And then this was like the talking strip. This is an example of how you can use visual supports to aid in communication. There's so many examples, so let's just keep moving on. The next way we can use visual supports is to aid in comprehension. When we're trying to teach our child or our loved one something new, it's really helpful to do this in a way that is complemented with visual supports. I have an example here that I made on Canva. I was working with a student who was having a really hard time understanding the concept of how many more. So I made these supports. This one showed a stack of 5 blocks and a stack of 3 blocks. And then I have the dotted line showing, okay, this is where they're the same and where they stop being the same. And I have the number here showing 3 and 3. And then using the bracket here that says how many more, and it's 2. So it's really clearly showing like this is what the measurement of how many more is. And it also had the subtraction problem on the bottom. With the visual support, you can also change it and fade back the level of support so that the child is able to have greater independence in demonstrating the concept. The thing with using visual supports too is that they are easier to fade than a verbal prompt. And I like to think it's because autistic individuals are really good at like keeping pictures in their mind. And when you have like a visual support like this, and then you fade it away, that person can much better able pull up that image of that visual support and rely on it in their brain to help them in its absence, as opposed to a spoken word, which is very fleeting, hard for them to store, hard for them to hold on to. I think that's another reason why visual supports are really helpful. So this is an example of how you can do it to aid in comprehension. And remember, it's really important that when we're teaching concepts to use these things, because this is also a way that we can help with nervous system regulation. It could be really stressful to an autistic learner if they're trying to learn a concept and they are having a hard time processing the auditory information or processing what you want them to learn. But visual supports really help make it a lot more understandable, which is going to increase the chances that their nervous system is going to get less triggered by feeling flustered from not understanding. It's also important to understand that you don't have to necessarily use pictures or create a fancy visual support like the ones I'm showing here. Sign language can also be a form of visual support. I have used sign language with many of my students to help them in the moment say something that they need to say, or to initiate communication that they weren't able to initiate without the presence of the sign as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be official American Sign Language that you're using either to prompt it. When I'm working with my students who have apraxia and have a difficult time with motor speech planning to produce their speech sounds, one of the most effective parts of my therapy protocol is the use of visual cues and tactile cues. I cue all of the sounds on my face, and it's just another level of support that this child is getting to activate their system to know how to control their mouth to say the speech sounds. So that's another huge thing of what I do is the physical cues that are also visual cues in that moment. You can also use visual cues to help your child know what to expect. And again, with nervous system regulation, this is another big one that goes a long way with helping your child stay more regulated. One of the things, like we talked about last week with the predictive brain, Autism and the Predictive Brain by Peter Vermeulen, I know autistic individual has a decreased ability to predict what's going to happen. And we talked about in part 1 of this series how there's a disability of trust. The more we can let our autistic loved ones know what's going to happen, what to expect in the environment or in their day, or in the situation that they're going to be entering into, the calmer they will be about entering it and the less anxiety they will have, the more regulated their nervous system will be. Great way to do this is with visual schedules. Here's an example of a visual schedule. I always like to have a to-do and a finished. And then on the back is all the different things. This was a visual schedule of all fun things. So the child gets to put the order of the toys that they want to play on. And let's say they chose a bear. And then when bear is all done, they get to move it into the finished. And then they just work their way through the schedule. I like to do this in my speech sessions, and it's almost like called an embedded schedule because it's a visual schedule for one individual part of their bigger day. And it was really, really helpful. That's another part of the success of my therapy protocol that I do to help my autistic children that also struggle with motor speech planning difficulties producing speech. I have a whole speech practice routine that has a visual schedule that goes with it. It's very predictable. And it really helps organize my students so that they're not in that fight, flight, or freeze. They know exactly what to expect so that they can start to focus on the difficult work of producing the speech sounds in a way that feels safe for them. You can also use first then boards. Now, I know that you'll hear sometimes that first then boards are out, they're ABA affiliated, and I'm not talking about using a first then board in the way that like first work, then iPad, where you're withholding your child's wants and then making them work to get it. I'm suggesting using a first then board as a simplified visual schedule. So for example, let's say that you have to go to the grocery store and you just use a first then board with your child, say first grocery store, then home, to let them know we're just going to the grocery store and then we're going home. That might be enough to help ease their anxiety around not knowing how long they're going to be out in the community and being a little more tolerant when you are at the grocery store. Speaking of being at the grocery store, you could use a visual schedule to talk about the aisles you're going to go down in the grocery store. It might take some pre-planning. If you want to walk all of the aisles, maybe you have to count how many actual aisles there are in the grocery store. But if you have your child sitting in the cart and they get to move every time you go down an aisle, they move a number to finish, that's really going to help them tolerate the trip through the grocery store because it's a way of assuring them this isn't going to last forever. You know exactly how long this is going to be. When we get through all of these aisles, then we go to checkout and then we go home. And then maybe that's when you pull out the first checkout, then home. So using a first then board as a visual schedule, a simplified visual schedule can be really, really helpful. Another way that you can use visual cues are as teaching aids or reminders. For example, if you're in a doctor's office and you're in the waiting room, just having a wait symbol out to let your child know we're in a waiting mode right now. Or use the first wait, then doctor. I like using, this is a thought bubble again, nothing fancy. So this is a laminated picture of a cloud and you can see all the dots on there. That's dry erase marker that has been erased, written on and erased. So you can use a thought bubble. And I like to use this to guide a topic of a conversation. So let's say we're talking about in my buddy group program, we're talking about the weekend. I might write the word weekend on the thought bubble. And when we're going around the group and talking about things, if a child starts introducing a new topic, I'll validate what they said. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I hear you really want to talk about that. But right now, all of our thought bubbles are talking about the weekend. Can you tell us what you did this weekend? Or maybe you can ask Johnny about what he did this weekend. It's just a nice visual support. And while I'm at it, notice that I don't have any fancy pictures. I just wrote the word weekend written cues count as visual supports, and it's really effective, especially if your child's a reader and you're out in the community. You don't need a fancy visual schedule. You can write it down on a piece of paper and just write down, these are the things we're doing on the piece of paper, and your child gets to cross it off as you go through. These things don't have to be fancy. They just have to be clear so that it helps your child feel more regulated and know what to expect. Another way you can do this is if you have a child who has a hard time focusing when they're doing their homework, maybe. You can put, let's say, the word math in the thought bubble. So you put math, this is what we're focusing on, this is what we're thinking about in our brain, put it on the table. And if your child gets distracted and starts thinking about something else, you can point at the thought bubble like, okay, remember, we have math in our thought bubble right now. Can we refocus back to our math homework? So that's another great way to use the thought bubble. You can use picture strips that sequence the steps of an event to help your child be more independent in completing a daily activity or a routine or a chore, such as maybe making a sandwich, how to do an art activity, how to brush their teeth, how to wash their hands. Visuals are also great to help make abstract and fleeting concepts more concrete and lasting. This is such a powerful tool if you have a child that might get stuck on a topic and gets anxious about something, and they're asking the question over and over and over and over again. So for example, in like a buddy group, let's say that someone's absent and it's triggering one of my students, and they keep asking, where's Susie? Where's Susie? Susie's sick. Uh-oh, where's Susie? They're saying things like that. I can write down, Susie's sick today. She'll be back next week, on a piece of paper or post it, an index card, whatever you have available. The child or individual can hold that and read it over and over again to remind themselves of the answer, and to see the answer over and over can be calming for their nervous system. And as such, they might not feel the need to ask the question over and over and over again, because they can see the answer visually for themselves, which can help be calming and grounding. You can also use a clock if you want to talk about when something's going to happen, or if a child has to wait for something and your child doesn't have a concept of time yet. Let's say that their dad is going to be home soon and they're really excited for their dad to get home, but the dad is not going to be home until, let's say the dad's not going to be home until 9:15. So you can actually write on the clock and, like this, write a line where the minute hand is, and then draw all the way around to 15. And then maybe you want to use a different color to write right on that line, on that 10:15, dad home. And I highly suggest, if you don't have an analog clock, to get one so that your child can see through the passage of time. Even if they can't tell time, they can see that the minute hand is getting closer and closer to that purple line where dad will get home. And that will make a very difficult abstract concept for your child easier to understand, because they can visually see it, even if they can't tell time. I love this. I'll make a whole video just on how to use the clock. It's such a great, powerful tool. I used to use the clock in my group therapy sessions. I had one special chair that, of course, all the kids wanted to sit on. So my sessions would be 30 minutes long. And so I would say, okay, you guys, here's the minute hand, and we are done with speech at 10:30. And then you cross out the time on the clock that's not relevant. And then you say, okay, so there are 4 of you here. Let's say each of you gets 5 minutes to sit on the ball, but it's up to you to remind the person who has the ball that it's your turn. And then I would write their names, like Johnny gets a turn first, and I would have the students negotiate with each other to figure out who gets to go first. And then let's say Michael, and then June, and then Sally. And they loved this. They loved being in control of their own time. And it's teaching them independence. It's teaching them advocacy skills. It's teaching them to be responsible and accountable to their own turn and their own responsibility. And it was such a great tool. So there's so much you can do with the clock. So the last way I want to talk to you about as to how you can use visual supports to support your autistic loved one is we can use them to teach steps and expectations around daily routines. I see this all the time where families have conflict between what mom and dad's definition of what a clean room looks like versus what the kids' definition of a clean room looks like. And so, to be utterly clear as to this is what a clean room looks like, what I suggest is help your child get to what that clean picture looks like. Whatever, if it's the bedroom, if it's a shelf, a desk, whatever you are saying is clean, take a picture of what it looks like clean. And then when you tell the child to clean their room, you tell them to actually match the picture. And then there is no debating. There's no difference in opinion as to what clean looks like versus doesn't look like, because you have a picture model to say, oh, well, look, in the picture, there's no clothing on the floor, and I see 3 pairs of shoes on your floor. And notice I'm using declarative language. And so then the child has to initiate, oh, right, I have to figure out what to do with those shoes. The room isn't technically clean yet. Whereas to the child without that picture, maybe my room's fine. Who cares if there's 3 pairs of shoes on the floor? It's clean. But when you have the picture, there's no debating it. And it's also great for having a picture of done and telling the child to match done is actually more effective than using a sequence strip of pictures in terms of executive functioning skills for them to get to done. On that note, you can use a picture sequence of steps to guide how to do something, how to make something. Maybe you make a picture recipe for your child so that they can become independent in making their favorite meal or snack. Another great way to use visual supports, and I love this way, I actually have a mini course on how to do this, is to create social stories. Social stories are great to help a child in knowing how to navigate a situation in a more effective way in terms of behavior or the choices they're making. And they're also great to give a person a sense of what's going to happen in a novel situation or a new environment. Like, for example, going to the dentist. I have a going to the dentist story template that I have created, and it's part of that mini course. If you're interested in learning more about that, just drop in the comments below. Tell me about the social story course, and I'll find a way to get that to you. But it basically just tells the story of what to expect when you get there, along with pictures. And the more you can use actual pictures of the space is great. And in this course, I show you how to do that. We're so lucky we live in the digital age because we can go on the internet and find real pictures of places we've never been to before and use that to show our child so they know what to expect. If you don't want to write a whole social story, speaking of that, you can go onto a website. Let's say you're going to go to an amusement park and you want to give your child a heads up as to what it's going to look like. You could go onto the website and find pictures and maybe even the map and give them an indication of what the environment that they're about to go to looks like. And again, this goes a long way in nervous system regulation and helping the individual feel more comfortable in entering into an unknown environment. So there you go. Whew, that was a lot. So those are some ways that you can use visual cues to support your loved one. If you have a question as to how you can use a visual support to help your loved one in a particular situation that you're experiencing right now, let me know in the comments below. I would be happy to give you some thoughts and suggestions. I really enjoy this aspect of working with my students, and I think that I have a knack for figuring out how to make things visual. So let me know. I'd be happy to help. And like I said, canva.com is a great resource and a great tool to make visual supports in a really easy way. If you guys would like me to do a video on how to use Canva to make visual supports, so let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to do that. You can also reach out to your teachers, your speech therapists, your occupational therapists, your physical therapists, and ask them to help you make a support if that's what you're looking for. You could say, hey, I was hoping to put up a communication board on the refrigerator to help my child be able to request what they want to drink easier. Are you able to make that for me? Just give them the list of vocabulary and hopefully they'll be more than happy to help. And if not, let me know. Part of my parent consulting services is I make this type of stuff for my clients. If we are discussing a strategy to implement that requires some visual support, I make the visual support and I send it along so that all you have to do as a client of mine is print and use it. And you don't have to waste your time with making the support, although it's not a waste of time. It's a very great use of your time, but I know that you are all busy. So that's why I like to include that as part of the service when I work with my parent consulting clients. So that's it. That's all I have for you today on part 3 of the 3 things you must know about autism. And just to recap, number 1 was nervous system regulation. Number 2 was sensory regulation. And number 3 is make it visual. Of course, there's many other aspects about autism that are important to know, but I really do feel like those 3 things are of utmost importance and really are true across the board for autistic learners. I am going to link the playlist to this video so that you can find parts 1 and 2 in case you missed them really easily, and I will see you next week. Bye.